Thank you for joining with us. We continue our series through the Gospel of Matthew here in Matthew chapter 24, and we're looking at verses 32 to 51. I recently heard about a couple from Minneapolis who decided to go to Florida to kind of thaw out during a particular icy winter. And the story goes that they planned to stay at the very same hotel where they had spent their honeymoon some 25 years earlier. But because of their hectic schedules, it was difficult to coordinate their travel plans. And so the story goes that the husband left Minnesota and flew to Florida on his own on Thursday, with his wife flying down the following day. The husband checked into the hotel in Florida. There was a computer in his room, and so he decided to send an email to his wife. However, he accidentally left out one letter in her email address, and without realizing the error, he sent the email. Meanwhile, somewhere in Houston, a widow had just returned home from her husband's funeral. He was a pastor of many years who was called home to glory following a sudden heart attack. The widow decided to check her email, expecting messages from relatives and friends. But after reading the first message, she fainted. The widow's son rushed into the room. He found his mother on the floor, and he saw the computer screen and read the following email. To my loving wife. Subject, I've arrived. I know you're surprised to hear from me, the email said. They have computers here now, and you are allowed to send emails to your loved ones. I've just arrived and have been checked in. I see that everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope your journey is as uneventful as mine was. P.S. It sure is hot down here. I think everybody would say they want to go to heaven, but it seems that very few want to go right now. And yet, we're fascinated with the afterlife, and we all wonder, how is it all going to end? Well, in our continued study here in Matthew 24, we're dealing with the whole subject of how is it all going to end? We saw last time how the disciples come to Jesus privately, and they ask him two questions. Basically, when and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? In other words, the disciples want to know, how will we know when it's all going to be over? And I think we want to ask the same question. How do we know when it's all going to end? Well, we looked at verses 1 through 14 here, where Jesus gives his disciples a panoramic survey of the centuries moving up and toward the end of the age. And we showed how Jesus points out that the signs to look for begin to appear during this church age, the age in which we live, and those signs will increase more and more in awful intensity leading up to the Great Tribulation. Now, the tribulation is that 7-year period of judgment just before Christ's second coming, where literally all hell is going to break loose upon the earth. And we saw last time the 5 signs, 5 of them, that Jesus told his disciples to look for that will lead up to this time. And they include the rise of false Christs or false messiahs, and we're certainly seeing that today. The increase of wars, and we're seeing that today. The escalation of famine. The evidence of numerous earthquakes and the spread of plagues, all of which, again, we're seeing today. But then Jesus adds here in verse 8, but these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. In other words, these are not the signs of the end, but rather the labor pain signs leading up to the ultimate birth or delivery of the end of the age. Now, in God's time frame, we really don't know how long these birth pangs, as Jesus calls them here, will last. Well, we showed last time how the birth pangs really have been increasing in intensity for the last 2,000 years. And just like the birth pangs that I witnessed with my wife giving birth, the pain, the spasms, the contractions, they slowly grow, they slowly build over a period of time until birth and delivery. Well, in the same way, we've always, as a world, been in labor. But the painful contractions in this world are increasing in awful intensity more and more, especially today. And so history, as we know it, I believe, will be over someday, a lot sooner than we might imagine. Now, the last time we took a look at verses 15 to 28 here, where Jesus gives us an even more detailed description of what to expect during the evil, the horrors of the Great Tribulation. And we saw how Jesus gives specific instructions to the nation of Israel. In fact, he tells his people that the supreme sign of the end of the age, the number one thing to look for, is the abomination of desolation, or the Antichrist, who will set himself up in the temple there in Jerusalem and claim to be the Messiah, and then require that the world worship him. When that happens, Jesus basically tells the people, run for your life, get out of Dodge, head for the hills. Why? Because the horror of that great tribulation is about to begin. And an unprecedented time of persecution, suffering, and death will occur throughout the world for the next 3.5 years, just before the Lord's glorious return. Several years ago, there was a best-selling series of books entitled Left Behind. It was the Left Behind series written by Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. And to be honest, I only read the very first novel, and it was fascinating reading. The novel attempts to describe all the various evils, all the horrors of what will accompany the last days. But as any novelist will admit, it's much easier to get people to read about darkness than light. It's easier to get people to read about vice rather than virtue, about unfolding evil, than to read page after page of good. Why is that? Well, one historian made this observation. He said, throughout much of history, people have been looking more for the Antichrist than for Christ. And there have always been more interesting speculation about the identity of who the Antichrist really is. He adds that some of the leading candidates down throughout church history have included certain people like Nero, or Napoleon, or Stalin, or Hitler. But speculation about the identity of the Antichrist has gone the other way as well. Some have announced that the Antichrist was the great reformer Martin Luther, or John Calvin. And in our day, some say it's Bill Gates, or Donald Trump, or Joseph Biden, or even the Pope himself. But you know, I don't believe that the Lord wants us to fixate on who the Antichrist is or isn't. Instead, we are to focus our attention on the Lord Jesus Christ and his coming. Someone put it this way: plan your life out as if Jesus could return in 100 years, but live your life out daily as if Jesus could return at any moment. Now, we pick it up here in verse 32, where Jesus illustrates everything that he's been saying up to this point with a parable. It's a fascinating parable. It's the parable of the fig tree. Take a look at verse 32. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Let's stop there. The point of this parable of the fig tree is simply this: just as leaves appearing on a fig tree signal that summer is very near, so also the signs during the tribulation period are a signal that Christ's second coming is very near. You know, it's interesting that the nation of Israel is described in the Bible as a fig tree, like a fig tree, in Jeremiah 24 and Hosea 9 and in Joel chapter 1, etc. But because of that, there have been many who have read far more into this parable of the fig tree than is actually there. Some have suggested that what Jesus is really saying here is that the big sign to really look for is when Israel, like a fig tree, will begin to bud or to blossom. In other words, the sign to look for is when Israel becomes a nation. And that happened in 1948. And so the argument goes that the nation, or I should say the generation that sees Israel become a nation, will be the generation that sees Christ's return. And so based upon the fact that a generation is about 40 years, and doing the math, I remember growing up and hearing Bible teachers speculate that Christ had to return before 1948, which was 40 years after Israel became a nation in 1948. I mentioned a few weeks ago about a book that came out in the mid-1980s entitled 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. And when Jesus didn't return that year, the same author came out with 89 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1989. What's the 89th reason? The fact that Jesus didn't come back in 1988. But the context here in verse 33 has nothing to do with Israel becoming a nation. Jesus points out here that when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. When you see what things? Well, all the things that he has pointed out to as the signs to look for during the tribulation period. In other words, the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist, the rise of false Christs, wars, famines, earthquakes, plagues. In other words, the context here indicates that the leaves that will show up on a fig tree just before summer correspond to the signs that will show up just before the second coming of Christ. It has nothing to do with Israel becoming a nation. Now, Israel becoming a nation may be a fulfillment of other Old Testament prophecies, but that's not what Jesus is talking about here in Matthew chapter 24. You know, Jesus really meant that when he said, of that day or hour, no one knows. However, he's also telling his disciples here that there are definite signs that show that we can know the season of the end and when it's approaching and when God's judgment is beginning. And so these signs indicate an absolute certainty that he is coming soon. Now, here in verse 34, Jesus adds these words, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." That word generation in the Greek is the word geneo, and it can mean basically two things. It can mean age or era, or it can mean race or people group. And so when Jesus declares that this generation will not pass away until all these things take place, he may be saying the people of that age or era or that period of time who endure the tribulation and see the signs will also see the second coming of Christ. And that makes sense, because the time of the tribulation is so short. It's only 7 years. On the other hand, Jesus may be saying that the Jewish race as a whole will survive and be preserved in spite of the horrible, intense persecution until the Lord comes back at the end of that time. And that makes sense too. In fact, that is a promise wonderfully fulfilled to this day. Israel still exists. It has survived. But in any case, the point of the illustration of the fig tree is not to watch Israel become a nation, but to watch for the signs of the end times and Christ's return. Now, how do we know for sure that Jesus is coming back? Because Jesus promised that he would. In verse 35, Jesus says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." You know, other than God himself, there are only two things that are eternal: people and God's word. Human beings are created in God's image. They have eternal value. Nothing else does. And the Bible says that every person will live forever. Every person. The real question is where that person will live forever. A real place called heaven or a real place called hell. And we need to be honest with people about the reality of both. Now, I read how the great preacher Charles Haddon Spurgeon years ago told his students this. He said, "When you speak of heaven, let your face light up. When you speak of hell, well, then your everyday face will do." Think about it. Every person will live on for eternity. And the only other thing that will last for eternity is God's word. And Jesus states here that even heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So how do we know he's coming back? Jesus tells us, because my eternal word says so. That's why. And you know, since God's word and character cannot change, his warnings and his promises will be fulfilled. Heaven and earth will someday cease to exist, but people and his word never will. Now, in verse 36, Jesus makes an interesting comment here. He says, "But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone." And so it's not our business to calculate the exact time of his return. In fact, Jesus points out here, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Even Jesus himself admitted he didn't know the day nor the hour of his return. Now wait a minute. Isn't Jesus God? Yes. Doesn't he know everything? Of course. Is he not omniscient? Yes, he certainly is. But remember that when Jesus spoke these words, listen, he spoke these words to his disciples, it was from the standpoint of his limitations that he took upon himself at that time and in that place as a human. In other words, although Jesus certainly knows today when he's coming back, back then he did not know. Why? Well, the Apostle Paul put it this way. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 6, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Now, theologians have a big fancy word for that. They call that the kenosis of Christ. Kenosis is the Greek word to empty. In other words, while here on earth, Jesus, as God, fully man, voluntarily emptied himself and gave up some of his divine prerogatives or divine abilities. Why? In order that he might identify with us and to humble himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Let me offer kind of a crude illustration. Let's say I want to play one-on-one basketball with LeBron James. Now, LeBron is the number one top-ranking NBA player in the world today. Now, what makes that funny is that I'm a lousy basketball player. I don't stand a chance. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that LeBron wants to play me for some reason. He wants to be my friend, and he wants to give me a chance to play on the same court. Now, there's no way that I can even hold a ball with LeBron on the court, let alone dribble or even attempt to make a shot at the basket. And so LeBron agrees to make the competition a little more fair. He voluntarily puts one leg in a cast and he ties one arm behind his back. And so he's going to play me with one leg and one arm. But I know that I still don't have a chance. And so I ask him, can you put a patch on one of your eyes and also put a 25-pound weight around your waist? And let's say he agrees. Now, even if I tell him he can only make three-point shots from the half court, LeBron will probably still beat me. But what he does in order to play me is to voluntarily limit himself in order to play me on the same basketball court. Again, that's a crude illustration of what Jesus has done for us. When Christ came to this earth 2,000 years ago, he voluntarily limited himself in order to identify with us, to serve us, and to die on a cross on our behalf. But Christ never ceased being God, any more than LeBron ceased being LeBron. And so, when Philippians tells us that Christ emptied himself, it simply means that he voluntarily gave up some of his divine abilities, including his omniscience. And so when Jesus told his disciples that even he didn't know the time, the day, or the hour, he was obviously speaking from that vantage point of his own limited human knowledge at that time and in that place, and not from the standpoint of his eternal divine omniscience. I hope that makes sense. The point that Jesus is making here in verse 36 is that it's not our business to calculate the exact time of his return. Nobody knows when he's coming back. But we are to watch for the signs of the season that tells us that his return is close at hand. Beginning here in verse 37, Jesus gives us 3 clues as to what his return is going to look like. 3 clues about Christ's return. The first clue Jesus gives us is the lesson from the days of Noah. And the lesson from the days of Noah is this, that his coming will be a total surprise. Look at verse 37. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days which were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Let me stop there. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. Now, what were the days of Noah like? Well, they were not only evil days, But Jesus points out that just before the great flood, everybody was just eating and drinking. They were marrying and giving in marriage. In other words, they were just going about the daily routine of life. In other words, people back then were just enjoying the normal pursuit of everyday existence, having a good time. They were partying. They were living it up with no awareness at all of God's impending judgment. It was just business as usual, just before the great flood suddenly came upon them and wiped them out like a tsunami. And so Jesus is telling us that just like the people back in Noah's day were totally unprepared, completely caught by surprise before God's sudden judgment, so also the people will be totally unprepared, totally caught by surprise when Jesus Christ comes back someday. And even with plenty of signs and warnings, people will still not be expecting it. Just like the days of Noah, his coming will be a surprise. The second clue that Jesus gives as to what his return is going to look like is the lesson from the servants, and that is that his coming will be selective. Take a look at verse 40. Then there shall be 2 men in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and one will be left. Therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. Now, contrary to popular opinion, listen, this is not a reference to the rapture. A lot of people use this passage as a reference to the rapture. This is the judgment, actually, that's going to take place at Christ's second coming, just at the very end of the tribulation period. And so it's not the righteous person here that's taken, but the unrighteous man or woman that is taken to judgment and death. Now, why do I say that? Remember back in Matthew chapter 13, verse 40, Jesus described these people like weeds or tares in a field. He says, therefore, just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. Remember that it was the wicked who were taken away in the judgment of the great flood, and Noah and his family, well, they were left behind on a cleansed earth. So also will be the wicked who will be removed and judged when Christ returns. And it is the righteous believer at the end of the tribulation who will be left behind. Why? Why are God's people who survived that 7-year tribulation, why will they be left behind? These are the ones who will be left in their physical bodies here on earth in order to enter the blessing of the millennial kingdom. In other words, these are the subjects of God's new kingdom, who will have the awesome privilege of populating the glorious kingdom of Jesus Christ here on earth. The unbelievers will be taken to what the Bible calls the judgment of the nations, or the judgment of the sheep and the goats. Now, there's a third clue that Jesus gives as to what his return is going to look like. And it's the lesson from the thief. And the lesson is that his coming will be slothful. Look at verse 43. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you be ready too, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. Now, how does your typical thief break into a house? Well, he does so suddenly, and he does so unexpectedly. And if you know that a thief basically has been in your neighborhood for the past couple of nights, you're going to do several things. First of all, you're going to watch for him. You're going to be taking precautions, right? And you're going to prepare accordingly. Well, in just the same way, the alert believer will watch for the signs of the Lord's coming and prepare accordingly. So, how does the believer prepare accordingly for Christ's coming? How do you and I prepare ourselves for the return of the Lord? How are we to get ready? Well, beginning here in verse 45, we have the preparation needed for God's judgment. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and shall begin to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know, and shall cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. Weeping shall be there, and the gnashing of teeth. You know, Jesus tells us that there are two ways to live your life before his coming. First of all, you can live a prepared life, like the servant here who does his master's will and is ready at any time for his return and reckoning. You can live a prepared life. Or you can live an unprepared life, like the servant here who assumes that his master is not coming soon, and he treats his fellow slaves poorly, and he parties it up without a care in the world. Now, it seems clear from our passage that the basis of judgment is whether or not people waiting for his return will pass the final exam. Now, what's the final exam? Service. Service to God and service to one another. The good servant here is found doing, and he's therefore rewarded. It is his service to the Lord and to others that proves that he has a genuine faith. The evil servant is not found doing. He's caught by surprise, and he is severely judged. His lack of service both to God and to others proves his lack of genuine faith. He believed that his master was not going to return for a very long time, and that his master didn't care how he lived his life. And so we discovered that it really was the evil servant's belief system that affected his behavior. And so he took advantage of others. He beat his fellow servants, and he lived wickedly, eating and drinking with drunkards. Now, doctrinal error always leads to moral error. That's always true. In other words, what a person believes determines what he does. And so if a person doesn't believe that God will hold him accountable, well, he'll live like the devil. If a person doesn't hold God's word as a standard, then he'll come up with his own set of rules. If a person doesn't believe there's a real hell, well, he'll live like there's no tomorrow. What a person believes determines what he does. Now, the response of these two servants here are clear indicators of their inward condition. We know that a person is not saved by works, but only by faith through Jesus Christ our Lord. Ephesians 2:8-9 says that, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. It is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, that no one should boast." But the very next verse says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." You see, our faith will express itself in a lifestyle of certain concrete acts in doing the will of God. James 2:26 states it like this, "For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead." The great reformer John Calvin put it this way, "Faith alone saves, but the faith that saves is not alone." The Lord wants to find his servants, that's you and I, like the very first servant here, faithfully carrying out his will. And when he returns, there's going to be a separation of those who are faithful servants from those who are unfaithful servants. The faithful, or I should say the unfaithful here, will be sent, as Jesus tells them here, the unfaithful will be sent to that place where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What a horrible description of judgment. In the book, Your Life Ever After Heaven, the author illustrates it this way. He said, if you ever get the opportunity to visit Egypt, he says, with the tombs and the pyramids, study what was required to construct some of those monuments. Some studies revealed that it required the efforts of 100,000 workers, 40 years, to build just one of those pyramids. Can you imagine that? He said, as a part of your tour, you can't help but ask, why so much effort? Why would somebody put that amount of emphasis on a tomb, on the afterlife? Why? The answer is that the Egyptians understood full well that they would spend a whole lot more time in the afterlife than they would in this life. Granted, some of their conceptions of what would happen in the afterlife were a little skewed, he writes, but the point is this, that they understood at the very core of their being that the afterlife was a whole lot more important than this life. So they prepared for the afterlife during this life. God had placed eternity in their hearts. By way of application this morning, we as the church are described in the Bible as the household of God. And as his faithful servants, I don't think I'm reading anything into this verse 45 where Jesus indicates that a key part of our service in God's kingdom is feeding one another. In other words, we are called to serve one another, by feeding one another, to meet one another's real needs. Verse 45, who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Listen, when we stop serving one another, when we stop feeding one another, when we stop meeting one another's needs, our hearts will eventually grow cold toward God and toward one another. Like the evil slave, we can so easily fall into the trap of worldliness and quickly forget that Jesus Christ is coming back soon, sooner than we expect. You know the old story of how to boil a frog? You don't put a frog into a pot of boiling water. If you drop him into the boiling water, he'll jump out right away before he's injured. No, you put him into a pot of cold water, and he's perfectly comfortable. And then you put him on the stove, and little by little the water gets warm, and it's very pleasant at first. When it gets to jacuzzi level, he begins to be a little alarmed, but then finally when it's boiling, it's too late. We Christians are a lot like that, aren't we? We get into this world and it's so pleasant at first. And then it gets a little warmer and it's even more pleasant. And then one day we realize the danger. This is going to kill me. And we don't have the strength to get out. Like the evil slave, we can so easily fall into the trap of worldliness and quickly forget that Jesus Christ is coming back soon, sooner than we might expect. The best antidote to the disease of worldliness is servanthood. The best antidote to the disease of materialism is sacrificial giving. The best antidote to the disease of complacency and discouragement is to look up to the eternal hope and reward that awaits us. How are you serving the Lord at this moment as a faithful servant? How are you giving of your time, your talents, and your treasures? How are you living your life with the expectant hope, the joyful expectancy of life eternal with Jesus Christ our Lord? Our passage exhorts us here to serve Christ faithfully, looking for his glorious return every single day, every moment. Again, plan your life out as if Jesus could return in 100 years, but live your life out daily as if Jesus could return at any moment. Praise the Lord for that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this reminder, Father, that life is short. That, Father, we are called to be faithful. I pray that you'd help us to do that. Fill us with your Spirit. Help us, Lord, to be doing the things you've called us to do, living out our lives in accordance to your word. Help us to be all that you've called us to be as disciples, as followers of Jesus. May the light and love of Jesus shine forth in a dark and dying world in desperate need of a Savior. Help us, Father, to grow in you, to live with the imminent, joyful expectancy of your return, and again, to be found faithful in all that we do in attitude and in action. May the words of our mouth, the meditations of our heart, always be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, for you are our rock. You are our Redeemer. And it's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.